I've always been interested in horror games. The immense feeling of building dread and a well-executed jump scare make me feel energized like nothing else. Something about the fact that you're controlling the pace of the game makes it much more frightening than other horror mediums. One of my favorite examples of dread in a horror game is Layers of Fear. I can distinctly remember sitting in my friend's living room taking turns playing it through our squinted eyes. Every time we turned our back, something changed. I later realized what made this game so special to me: the crawling pace of ever-increasing dread, and the fact that it's all in your head. I think I love the horror genre so much because it's one of the only types of games to have such a profound effect on the mind. When you see a flickering light in a gloomy hallway, there's nothing inherently dangerous about the situation, but your brain screams, "Turn back." Visuals aren't the only thing that can trick your brain. Sound design is just as important. This stop sign here is looking a little spooky with the distortion effects, but we can do better. If I add a little bit of sound effects here, creepy. That little example highlights another reason why horror is one of my favorite game genres. Sound design is actually as important as visual design. If I love horror games so much, why don't I just make one? Well, the perfect opportunity arose in the summer of 2020 during the 2-minute horror jam. The guidelines were pretty self-explanatory. You must create a game that is short, unique, and of course, scary. Quickly, I drafted an idea. No, a feeling. That feeling when you are a child laying in bed at night trying to sleep, but you hear or see something scary. You hide under the covers hoping that if you don't look at anything, the thing will go away. After a while, you unclench your blanket and come back up from the covers, hoping to sleep soundly once more. In my game, however, this thing is not just in your head, and it's also not going to let you sleep soundly tonight. This is how I made Can't Sleep. If you haven't played the game for yourself, give it a quick look before you continue the video. It'll literally take 2 minutes of your time. Because the game had to be only 2 minutes long, I decided that the overall structure should be a gradual buildup of scary events that will culminate in a big scare. The player will lay in their bed the entire game, unable to move. The only control they will have is to look around and go under the covers. The lack of control plays a key role in developing dread and hopelessness. Despite this lack of control, you have much to take in. On your left, a window shields you from a roaring thunderstorm outside. On the right, clock ticks away as the midnight hours pass by. The door ahead of you shelters you from the horrors beyond. For now. When you begin Can't Sleep, all will be well. However, once you first go under the covers, the eeriness begins. Going under the covers will trigger an event. The problem for you, though, is that you can only hear this event. To see what just happened, you must bravely come out from under the covers. Lack of information is yet another factor of dread and fear. Once you come out from under the covers, something has changed. Maybe a light was switched on, maybe a desk was moved. That's for you to discover. It's not over yet, though. After coming out from the covers, you have unknowingly triggered another event, one that will happen in front of your eyes. They start out small, like your favorite soccer ball rolling off of your shelf, but they grow more alarming as you progress. You have no choice but to hide under your covers and try to sleep these nightmares away. But the sounds keep coming. You trigger more events, and the cycle continues. They get worse. The monster isn't afraid to show itself anymore. And when it finally has you trapped in the place you call home, it strikes. And this is how I made it. So, at this point in my game development journey, this was my most recent game in Unity. Yeah. So to say I had skill limitations while making a horror game would be somewhat of an understatement. My limitations as a game developer would actually come in handy because I decided to join 4 game jams at once. It may sound like a daunting set of limitations, but my game idea already fit the theme of all 4 jams. My game is a short horror experience, so it was eligible for the 2-minute horror jam. Players only use the spacebar to progress through the game, so it fit the 1-button jam. The game revolves around the theme of shelter and being trapped in it, so it fit the weekly Jam 168's theme, Shelter. And lastly, my game is full of cubes and assets I pulled from the internet, so I think it's pretty safe to say I could join the I can't draw but want to make a game jam. To start the game off, I began with designing the room. Like I mentioned before, my knowledge of Unity was quite limited, so I made the exterior room by combining a bunch of cubes together. I know, the Unity gods will smite me for this horrendous act. However, the cubes came in handy when I needed to build the walls around the door and window. Speaking of which, the window was an important piece of Can't Sleep. It gives the player a feeling of liberation from being able to see outdoors and a feeling of safety knowing that they are sheltered from the storm outside. That must be why it's so scary when I rip those feelings away from them. Anyway, I finished up the storm outside by adding some rain particles and a periodic lightning flash on random intervals. You can see how my game is the pinnacle of game developers not caring what players don't see. With the exterior completed, it was time to fill the room, so I added some objects to make the place feel more like home. Also so I could use them as props for my horror events. Although the visual design most definitely looked like my second game in Unity, I made up for it with sound effects. I wrote up a list of all the sound effects I needed and went to work. I mostly went about my room hitting various objects and surfaces, and it worked out wonderfully. Fear in video games is best built up through what the player constructs in their own mind, because whatever you can put on screen will never be as scary as what they're dreading is around the corner.
You know what? I'm just gonna do it. Back to sleep I go. And the door is opening.
To achieve this, each horror event has a corresponding sound effect to it when it's triggered. This works especially well when the player is under the covers. The screen is black, so all they can do is imagine what the sound they just heard was. Even without the horror aspect, I think including the vast amount of sound effects really added to the immersion of the game. If making Can't Sleep taught me anything, is to put effort into the sound of your game. After all, sound is half the sensory experience of a video game. With everything prepared, I moved on to the main part of the game, the horror events. Like I mentioned before, there are two types of events, hidden events and live events. Hidden events occur while the player is under the covers. In this type of event, objects will be moved or changed by the monster. These objects change their position instantly because I didn't know how to interpolate movement well, and the player can't see it anyway. Once the player comes out from under the covers, a live event will trigger. The events are very similar to hidden events except for the fact that the player can see what is happening. Because of this, I put a little more work into how they appeared. All events are controlled by this game event control script, which uses the game object scripts to call upon their respective events. I completed all the horror events, and now I just needed to wrap up the game in a nice neat little murderous bow. This was where I made my biggest mistake. I had done research on what makes a good jump scare, and everyone discussed how important the build-up and feeling of dread is. I believe I did this step really well, and the comments agree with me, but they also agreed with me that the end left much to be desired. My biggest mistake in Can't Sleep was the end, where all the rising dread was supposed to culminate in a final scare. But my jump scare sucks. I'm so embarrassed by it that I cringe every time I see it. I skipped watching the end of most players' gameplay videos because I just couldn't keep looking at it. It's just not frightening. The monster doesn't look scary, doesn't move at all, and the scream sound effect feels too long.
Can't sleep. Is it scary? Nah, don't think so. I mean, that end part, the guy looked creepy, but I don't think that was scary at all, considering how the guy's not scary. But everything else is just good.
All the dread I built up over the past minute and a half just kinda disappears. If there's anything I could change about Can't Sleep, it would be that. However, in my defense, I'm not very skilled at 3D game design. I tried my best with the skills I had, and it didn't work out great. But you know, I still did something. I made a short game that literally thousands of people experienced. Some of them were bewildered, but most of them were genuinely scared. And at the end of the day, isn't that what games are all about? Giving the player an experience that they can feel and become immersed in? Although the game is short and has its shortcomings, I'm still really proud of it. I enjoyed designing an experience that others could get involved in. I hope that everyone who's played my game has a feeling that they just can't sleep tonight. Until next time, have a dreadfully great day.